Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 8 of Indefensible New Zealand. I'm Simon Ewing-Jarvie. Today, a very big topic, transformation, talking about people, structure and culture in the defence space. You'll recall I mentioned a couple of times, especially in the last episode, about the number one priority problem is people. Not enough of them, not in the right places, in many cases not the right people. And that links, of course, with defence, lack of mass and lethality generally. So let's take a quick drive-by of people, structure and culture. So why have I chosen this topic? Well, Indefensible New Zealand exists with the goal of provoking long overdue and difficult discussions about New Zealand's national security, and this is one of those tough discussions that needs to be had. This episode considers some of the elements of transformation for our Defence Force. As such, it sets out to just join the dots between service personnel, society and the Defence Force. You might, to those of you watching on YouTube, might have wondered why the title slide has got a picture of a group of guys around a big barrel full of grapes looking like they're about to make wine, which they are. And I want to just hat tip to one of probably the most influential mentor that I had, and that was the late Dr. Mike Bebb, who taught me the business of consulting when I left the full-time service. And he used to describe transformation and transactional change like this. Transformational change is like turning grapes into wine. Once done, they can never be turned back into grapes again. On the other hand, transactional change can be reversed. It's more like rearranging the fruit bowl, and someone can come along after you and just put the fruit all back where it was. So I want to relate that to three groups of society's members. Firstly, civilians. Secondly, service personnel, those currently serving either full-time or part-time. And former service personnel, which I could say veterans, but that just starts off that whole debate about who's a veteran. So if you've got a service number and you're not currently using it, you're in that third group. Now, once you've been in the services, it's impossible to go back to being a civilian again. That's been commented on by more than one person. You can put on the mantle of a civilian, like grow your hair, get a civilian job, get civilian clothes, and exercise personal freedoms that you didn't you couldn't exercise in the full-time service or part-time service. But you will always know, and it'll always be obvious to other people too, that you are different, and that's both a strength and a weakness. So why quit? There's so many reasons why service personnel leave the force. The reasons that are cited and captured in exit interviews, I don't think are actually really useful for much, actually. They're certainly not going to guide a retention strategy, because basically when people are doing an exit interview, they've already made the decision to go sometime earlier, and it may be their chance just to have their last poke in the eye at something that annoyed them. No matter what the organisation, Defence Force or other, most people leave when they decide that their personal values and those of the group no longer match. Now, whether it's them that's changed, and that happens with people where they get into a relationship, want to study, got other interests that the Defence Service is interfering with, or whether it's the organisation that has changed and they're leaving, I guess you'd say sadly, is important to determine. Some of those people that leave full-time service go to part-time service in the reserve. They still want to belong, but on their terms. And then there's others who don't go to the reserve, and they're sending a very clear signal that they wish to dissociate themselves with one or more aspects of the group we call defence. And they find disconnection harder than they thought. Now, it's been a long time since I've been in uniform, and so I'm going to talk about the life cycle of a toxic culture in general, and I'll leave it to those people that are still serving, or have just got out, whether some of these things relate to the culture that exists in the Defence Force at the moment. And I'm bringing this up because it's been raised with me several times in comments about the podcast and in other conversations. Here it is. There's 8 points that I'd like you to think about. The first one is silencing voices. And this means that employees feel that they can't speak up or share ideas. Don't be fooled by suggestion programs and boxes and all that sort of thing. That's not people being able to speak up and share ideas without fear of consequence. Number 2, broken trust. Promises aren't kept and transparency about decisions is lacking. 3, a blame culture. Mistakes are met with blame rather than solutions. 4, micromanagement. Leaders control every detail, leaving employees feeling trapped. Number 5, unhealthy competition. Competition replaces teamwork and collaboration, and particularly in regard to careers and advancement. 6, favoritism. Some employees receive better treatment than others, and that can be linked to the unhealthy competition that I was just referring to, when bad behaviour pays off, and it's seen to pay off. Number 7, high turnover. Talented employees leave due to a toxic environment. It is usually the talented ones that leave because they're the most economically mobile. You often end up left in an organisation with the people who would struggle to get a decent job outside that organisation. And because all the talented employees leave due to the toxic environment, finally you have widespread burnout where those that are left still trying to make it work feel exhausted and unmotivated. Now, I'll leave it to you to decide whether all or some of that relates to the Defence Force culture as we see it and experience it right now. So in terms of a problem statement, let me just say this. The real problems start when you treat your most loyal in such a way that they stop caring. And I've had personal experience of this. And when you have got people that are totally committed to the organisation and finally just go, you know what, I give up. Now, some of them leave, and some of them don't leave. Some of them continue to attend, draw pay and eat their lunch, but they don't work for you anymore. Both are equally problematic. So the Defence Force is faced with multiple dilemma in a resource-constrained environment. How does it transform itself? How does society do the right thing by former service personnel, those former grapes who are now wine? Well, it's a perfect storm, really. Let's look at the 3 elements. Firstly, we have a weak organisation that's on life support. These top-ups that come from Defence are simply replacing the accrual accounting measures of capital charge and depreciation, and occasionally a little bit on top of that. Even if, and transformational change, let's be honest, takes a lot of resources, a lot of effort, and it's not there. Even if the organisation wants to change, it will struggle to. And with much talent gone and numerous vacancies, Defence Force will kick the transformation can down the road I'm picking and focus on urgent tasks, regardless of whether they're important or not. Point 2 of the perfect storm is that ex-service personnel struggle to transition, and there are a lot. Even those that appear to be doing okay, when you sit down and talk with them, there's a lot they miss about the Defence Force they joined. Much less so that they miss about the Defence Force that they left. But even if everything goes to plan for a service person leaving the force, it's a new job, new civilian clothes, new haircut, personal freedoms, there's still a gap, and that gap usually can be described as a sense of purpose. Also, I think most are frustrated, and certainly my experience, with the way their service is viewed and what is valued in their new life. Not everyone is anti-military, but a lot of people don't understand the things that you learn and the way your life is. It's shaped for them by Hollywood. And look, in many organisations, there's absolutely no pretense of leadership or integrity in the workforce, and people attend to do to support the lifestyle that they wish to live outside the workplace. Number 3 in the perfect storm, external factors are putting pressure on all. So as security challenges rise, the government will expect more and more, and already is expecting more and more of a force that is severely degraded, partly because of previous government decisions and partly because of previous Defence Force command level decisions that have had the multiplying effect of degrading the capabilities of the force. Don't forget, morale is one of the elements of combat power. This force exists primarily to fight the nation's wars. and we seem to be getting better and better at doing a lot of other things, and not enough focus, I wouldn't say no focus, but not enough focus on warfighting and building up that capability. Economic constraints are going to making working and living more difficult for service personnel, and you only need to look at the number of people of my age or not much younger who have put their tail between their legs and run back into the womb to go back and work. And there's always a great story, but at the end of the day, these are people who have not transitioned. They've fiddled about in civilian life for any number of months or years, and eventually decided that it's much more comfortable to be back in uniform. And the Defence Forces, that's not going to take the Defence Force forward. All that's doing is rearranging the fruit in the fruit bowl. So here's an alternative future, and you know I like the red teaming. Well, I do it for a job, so alternate futures is part of that. In most organisations, 80% of the work is done by about 20% of the people. 60% are along for the ride, and they do enough in their view to justify their time and effort and the money they get. And the last 20% contribute nothing at all to organisational culture or to organisational performance, and often are damaging to the organisation in terms of its culture and outputs. And those of you still in or just out, you know one. You know at least one. It's essential to not only know who is in which category, but to act on that knowledge. Just imagine if you're a boss and someone comes up to you and says, I'm putting in my 717, which means I quit, I'm getting out of the Defence Force. Do you go, oh crap? Or do you go, yay? Or do you go, I wonder what that means? Now, if it's, oh crap, then there's been a mistake made and they've been mishandled. If it's yay, well, show them, get them out the door as quickly as you can. And if it's, I wonder what that means, then your job as the leader there is to push them into one of the other two camps. So you've got to get them out of the grey zone, get those people who are the into the yay or oh crap category, so you know where you stand in your organisational development. Now, apart from the disruption associated with major change, the New Zealand Defence Force has little to lose by taking a radical approach to transformation right now. Just go and remove those who need to be removed. I know it's not easy, but it's possible. Promote early from the existing rising talent, and actively seek out talented individuals who have left to refresh the ranks with direct entry specialists as well. Stop signing everyone up for a lifetime. Most people are journeymen, and you should give them a journeyman's contract on entry and then decide who you want to keep from there. So, 3 points. Remove the culture killers and the free riders. And here's a radical idea. Identify and exit senior personnel, and I'm talking lieutenant colonel equivalent and above, and about staff sergeant equivalent and above. At least 20%, and arguably up to half of those existing personnel in the ranks right now could be removed. Yep, I can see your faces. Secondly, take a risk on your young talent. Just imagine New Zealand was at war and large numbers of talented commanders were killed in the initial engagements. Of those remaining, who would you promote to replace losses? Go and promote them now. Offer seamless entry for talent in the reserve force. Offer direct entry for officer and NCO specialists in all trades. Just stop making excuses and do it. And finally, recover lost talent. There are hundreds of really talented former officers and NCOs are out there, and I'm not talking about people my age. If you're getting a veteran's pension, you should be, finding a hobby, not getting sized up for the next size up for uniform. So all those talented people are out. They do miss service in one way or another, but not the Defence Force they left. But when they see radical reform being made, many of them could be convinced to return on a full-time or part-time basis. Use flexible contracts. There are choices to be made here in an alternate future around transforming our personnel situation. Now, I want to just take a step sideways and look at Sir Robert Peel. And for those of you that don't know, he was a British politician, and he set up the London Metropolitan Police Force, which was arguably the first full-time police force in the world, certainly in the UK. And he, so his nickname was Bobby Peel, and in an unusual quirk of circumstance, his constables were referred to as Bobbies. Now, what he did was set up, he talked about 9 principles of modern policing, and I'm not going to go through all 9, but there's some of them that actually relate. Hop onto Wikipedia and you'll find them, but some of them actually relate really well to the Defence Force as well. I'm just going to cover off 2 for you. And one is to recognise always that the ability of the Defence Force, you can read Police Force, the ability of the Defence Force to fulfil its functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions and behaviour, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. And another one, to maintain at all times a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the Defence Force is the public and that the public are the Defence Force. Service personnel being only members of the public who are paid to give specific attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interests of community welfare and existence. And some of you might have followed the discussions around the outgoing police commissioner around policing by consent. That's how it's described, and that's where it comes from. And I think we need to think about defending by consent in the same way. Now, on the flip side, the public have there are always rights and there's duties. On the flip side, the public must recognise the unique nature of service in the Defence Force and ensure that government, organisations and people recognise by covenant the appropriate service for service personnel, the appropriate support for service personnel, current and former. And it's not there. The law is an ass in terms of protecting reserve force from their employers, for instance, and there's very little pressure on governments to support the Defence Force or veterans very well at all. So remember I talked to you about grapes and turning them into wine, and that transformation means they can never go back to being grapes again. Well, that's all well and good, but as you know, wine can go off as well, not as quickly as grapes. And so veteran services, to continue that metaphor, could focus on distilling the wine into spirits, brandy say, of those who are served. Then it won't go off. It brings out the absolute best, the purification of the best of what is the essence of each individual. And that might sound a bit religious, but let me tell you, I'm not. But I am very keen on seeing people achieve their absolute best in what they can be as a human being. And right now, I don't think former service people are getting a fair deal from society, and until society puts pressure on government to change that, nothing much will happen. So how defence in society is a well written up subject, and you can look at guys like Forster for this. How are armed forces legitimised and sustained by the societies which they exist to protect? And one area of debate here has been the right or the need for armed forces to be different from society in order to carry out their unique responsibilities and ultimately to sacrifice their lives, if necessary, in discharging those responsibilities. Militaries must be sufficiently subordinate to civilian rule, and societies must better understand what roles the armed forces should and should not play. However, the NZDF is, by law, not part of the public service. Same for the police. And the latter should not be playing a role in selecting senior commanders, as they are at the moment. Now, this is a change that came in with Helen Clark when she was Prime Minister, and I am appalled at the number of times I hear of people from the Public Service Commission, for instance. I know they've been told they have to run their selection processes, but taking someone, a very senior officer, for coffee to tell them not to apply, or telling them they're not going to make it because of this or that, is absolutely appalling, and it has to stop. I want to see the Public Service Commission right out of the command appointments process. unless we want to, just basically have a bunch of uniformed public servants, because that seems to be the trend we're on. So, in terms of the different ways that defence and society can interact, the nation and its defence force are one. And the best example perhaps is Israel, where almost everyone serves in uniform at some point and stays on as a reservist. It's widely acknowledged that in the country that if the IDF didn't exist in strength, the nation would not exist either. And it was actually those who arrived in 47, 48 and fought to create the State of Israel, regardless of what you think of it yourself, who formed the basis of the nation. The second model is one of separate but with linkages, and New Zealand's on the fringe of this relationship. It was stronger when national service and conscription was in place, and pretty much everyone had a relative or knew someone who had served or was serving. That's no longer the case, and with the near destruction of the, particularly the territorial army, there is very little contact day to day or week to week with people in New Zealand and uniformed service. I've talked about voluntary national service at length, and I think that would go some way to strengthening this, but it's not the only thing that needs to change. We've got to get out of this habit of feeling good for an hour on Anzac Day and saying lest we forget, and then forgetting for 364 days why we went there. We went there because we wouldn't be there, we'd be speaking Japanese or German, and if those that we remember hadn't actually gone and fought. So let's learn some lessons. And the final model is completely separate, and that's the total professionalisation of the force. And I have to say, there's an element within the New Zealand Defence Force and around the Western forces of the world who would love to see this. Reserves are a waste of time. Give us all the money, give us all the flash kit, give us a nice new camp, and we'll take care of everything. Well, in history, this hasn't gone so well. When you put your troops up, highly paid, nicely looked after in a castle, they have no connection with the society and the minions down below them, and then send them off to war and they get beaten and they walk back through the streets and the people laugh and throw rotten tomatoes at them. So if that's the case, the Defence Force may as well be a private military company, and I don't think that's in anyone's interest. Not that I don't think PMCs don't have a role in our order of battle, I think they do. So in conclusion, back to where we started, NZDF's most pressing need is people. It lacks mass. And even within the existing organisation, the structure, I've talked about too many headquarters, for instance, the structure, the culture, and many of the people are the wrong fit. They're not bad people, and they're not totally wrong. They might have been right once, but they're just wrong for the now, and definitely for many of them for the future that's facing New Zealand. A completely new command team's just taken over, so that this is a huge opportunity if they're brave enough. They need to act quickly on this. The runway for transformation is short. Thank you. unclares.com is where you can send me questions for the podcast. I'd love to read your comments below. That's it for now. Take care.